Let's dive into a really fascinating scientific mystery. It stars one of the world's most damaging invasive insects, the common wasp. This is a story about how the exact same bug can be just a minor pest at a picnic in one part of the world and a complete ecological disaster in another.
So take a look. On the left, in its native England, the common wasp, the Spula vulgaris, is, just an annoyance. But on the right, in its invaded home of New Zealand, it is a full-blown ecological menace. We're talking about the very same species, with two completely different reputations.
So you have to ask, right? How can the same insect be just a background bug in one place and a super pest in another? What on earth changes when it crosses the ocean? This is the exact question scientists set out to answer.
To really get it, let's look at just how different this story is. In New Zealand, these wasps don't just reach high numbers, they reach the highest known densities for this species in the world. Their impact is so bad, they've actually been seen killing native birds.
And to put a number on that, get this. Researchers have recorded densities as high as 40 nests in a single hectare. That is an absolutely incredible concentration of wasps, way beyond anything you'd ever see in their native England. The point is, this isn't a small difference we're talking about. It's a massive, massive one.
So, to figure this out, a team of researchers basically turned into detectives. They pulled together this amazing collection of long-term data. We're talking decades of wasp population counts from both England and New Zealand to search for clues that could explain this crazy difference.
And here's a look at the raw data they were dealing with. Each of those jagged lines shows the wasp numbers year after year. Just look at those huge peaks and deep valleys. That's what people call a wasp year versus a quiet year. The challenge for the researchers was to figure out what was driving these wild swings in both places.
Okay, so before we get to the clues, we need to understand the suspect's MO, right? The wasp life cycle is basically an annual sprint. A single queen survives the winter, and in the spring, she has to emerge and start a brand new colony all by herself. This spring period is a huge bottleneck. If she fails, that's it, no nest. But if she succeeds, that nest can explode in size by the end of the summer.
So our scientific detectives zeroed in on two main suspects. Suspect number one, external forces, like the weather. Is it a good spring or a bad summer that decides their fate? And suspect number two, internal forces, what you could call wasp wars. Does the population regulate itself through competition?
Well, when the researchers looked at the weather, they found a really interesting twist. It turns out weather does matter in both countries, just not in the same way. In England, the key factor was temperature. In New Zealand, it was all about rainfall. So the climate connection is real, but it's definitely more complicated than you might think.
Now for our second suspect, density dependence. This sounds kind of technical, but the idea is actually super simple. The more wasps you have packed into an area, the harder it is for everyone to find food and resources. All that competition slows down the population's growth rate. Basically, their own success leads to overcrowding, which then puts the brakes on.
And this right here is the proof. This graph is the smoking gun. Along the bottom, you have the number of wasps one year. And on the side, you have how fast the population grew the next year. See how the dots in both charts make a clear downward slope? That's it. It means when wasp numbers are high one year, the growth rate the following year is low. And this exact same pattern showed up in both England and New Zealand.
Okay, so with all the evidence gathered, the scientists were ready to deliver their verdict on what's really driving wasp populations. And honestly, the answer was not what a lot of people expected.
First thing they did was debunk a long-held theory. Now, you don't need to understand all the details of these charts, but what they show is that there are no predictable boom and bust cycles. The idea that you could expect a bad wasp year every 2 or 3 or even 7 years? Nope, it just wasn't in the data. The booms and busts seem to be random, not some kind of predictable rhythm.
So this brings us right back to the main question. After you account for everything, what is the single most powerful force that controls whether it's a wasp year or not? Surprisingly, while weather definitely plays a role, especially in the spring, it wasn't the main driver. It didn't explain those massive year-to-year swings. The answer was something much more fundamental.
Yep, the biggest factor wasn't an external force at all. It was the wasps themselves. That idea of density dependence, wasps competing with other wasps for food and space, that was, by far, the most powerful force shaping their populations every single year.
And this is the study's central conclusion.
stated loud and clear. The fundamental rulebook that governs how wasp populations grow is the same on both sides of the world. High populations one year pretty much guarantee a slowdown the next, and it doesn't matter if you're in an English garden or a New Zealand forest.
But wait a second, this brings us right back to our paradox, doesn't it? If the fundamental rule, that density dependence thing, is identical in both places, why are the population levels so radically different? Why is one just a nuisance and the other is a total plague?
Well, the answer isn't in the rules of the game. It's in the playing field itself. New Zealand is simply a much better place to be a wasp. Their active season is about 2 months longer, and the food sources, especially the stuff called honeydew in the forests, are incredibly abundant.
And that is the solution to the whole paradox. The wasps don't have some new secret invasion strategy. They're playing by the exact same biological rules, but on a playing field in New Zealand that is tilted heavily in their favor. It lets their populations get to much higher peaks before that same old internal competition finally kicks in and slows them down.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it has huge implications for how we think about invasive species. It suggests that an invader doesn't need a new evolutionary trick to become a major pest. Sometimes all it takes is finding an environment that's a perfect fit, one where its existing rulebook lets it just go wild.
And here's one final, kind of chilling piece of evidence from this study itself. At one of the test sites back in England, something dramatic happened around 1990. The local spring weather changed, becoming more favorable for wasps. And just like that, the local wasp population shifted gears. It started looking more like a problematic population, much larger and way more volatile. It was a real-world example of the playing field changing right before their eyes.
And that leads us to a final thought. This study showed just how sensitive wasps are to conditions in the spring. So as our global climate continues to change, could it be that it's altering the playing field everywhere? Could it create conditions where that crazy wasp year stops being an occasional thing and starts to become the new normal? It's a question this research really forces us to think about.